John, when people say that God is omnipotent, they think that God can do everything. Everything. Can God do everything?
God certainly can't do everything if by this you mean that he could, for example, make it true that I have never existed, that he could make 2 and 2 make 5, that he could make a problem which was too hard for him to solve and yet would be able to do everything, that he could make a stone too heavy for him to lift, and that would be a God there who could do everything. There's a contradiction there which is obvious. Could God make it true that the very best state of mind which you could have would be the state of mind of dying in agony, of somebody dying in agony, in complete misery? Could God just make it true by saying so that that was better than having a tremendously pleasurable and interesting experience? These are standard things which practically all the theologians would accept, are things which God couldn't do because they are utterly impossible.
Do we distinguish between things that are utterly impossible, like logical contradictions, like making a stone he can't lift, with value difficulties, like creating a situation where somebody dying in agony is a good thing?
It's a fairly standard view that you can't prove by appeal to logic that one thing is better than another. I think that there are some absolute necessities which go beyond what can be logically proved, and that God would be subject to those necessities just as much as to the necessities of not being able to make 2 and 2 make 5 or whatever.
Can God will himself out of existence?
A standard theological view would be that he couldn't, because this would be such a dreadful thing to do, and God would not do dreadful things. A standard theological view, but there would be theologians who so much respect the divine freedom that they would say, God could will himself out of existence. God could have decided to make a world which was from end to end of negative value, a world which was worse than nothing, all the beings in it having terrible, painful lives and so on. That was within God's power. They'd say this sort of thing.
And they would do that to defend the view of the freedom of God.
They'd put the freedom of God as more important than the goodness of God. That the goodness of God might just take second place here.
But in that scheme, the freedom of God would allow God to choose the goodness, as opposed to the goodness being a force which imposes a structure on God, no?
Indeed. You could say that if God had to be good, then in some sense this is an imposition on God, but also you could say if God has to have a mind knowing that 2 and 2 make 4 rather than 5, then this is a restriction on God. I'd rather, if I were to believe in God, I'd prefer to believe in a God who didn't think that 2 and 2 made 5, even though the freer God might have this thought in his mind.